I'm here with Keith Weed, the global CMO of Unilever. It's a brand with, it's a brand as a corporation, but you have many brands that you trade under. Before we go into how does one manage such a complex portfolio across the world, one of the topics we're talking about in this MOOC is the difference between a brand positioning and a brand purpose. What's your view on that? Is there a difference, and if so, what is that difference?
Well, of course, obviously different companies and indeed, different schools will teach slightly different things for different words. So I'll tell you what our definition is, and you'll see whether that's helpful or not. But for me, the positioning is a much broader thing. And in our brand positionings, one of the things we have within the positioning is what's the brand purpose. And the positioning for us would also define things like pricing and product, and I suppose more what we call the 6 Ps of marketing. I don't know how many Ps you teach. Is it 9 or 4? Again, different people teach a different number of Ps, but it has the whole thing. Whereas the purpose to us is the sort of the core of the brand and what it actually stands for.
And what would be an example of the purpose of one of your brands? Maybe one that we'll talk about later on.
I think Dove's a good example. It's a brand around the world, so hopefully most of your students will have heard of it. A very successful brand, a growing brand. And what Dove has done is really try to engage on this whole area of what they call real beauty. And the beauty industry has a certain point of view. And there are both positive but also negative consequences of that. And one of the negative consequences is about people's self-esteem. And Dove believes that beauty should be something of confidence rather than anxiety. And so this whole area of building people's self-esteem and celebrating real beauty rather than someone's version of beauty is what Dove's about. And so its purpose is very much around self-esteem, and then it takes it through to then what it does. So for instance, it had an ambition to teach 15 million young girls about body consciousness and self-esteem and awareness, and it's now crossed that, and it's obviously now setting a higher objective. So along with selling the products it sells, it also walks and talks about its purpose. So
part of your brand portfolio, maybe on the opposite spectrum almost, is the brand Axe or Lynx, which trades under different names in different markets. What would be the purpose of that brand, and how does one manage such different brands under one umbrella? Does that make your life difficult, or?
Well, we actually manage all our brands very much from the product brand perspective. So the Unilever brand, in fact, probably many of your students won't have even heard of Unilever. It's a brand that is behind the brands. And actually, really up until only, I suppose, about 10 years ago, we were very silent about Unilever. We talk more about Unilever now really because of the internet. And people can search and find out what is the company behind the brands. And if there is going to be someone looking for the company behind the brands, then we better tell them what the company stands for. Otherwise, you wouldn't know. So we're increasingly starting to market the Unilever brand, but really more as sort of a reassurance of what the company stands for. I'm come on to talk about that a little bit later. So as far as our product brands are concerned, the Doves, the Walls, the Axes of this world, we very much lead with what they stand for, and Unilever is quite quiet. I mean, there's a Unilever U on the back of the pack. In fact, it's the most used logo in the world. That little U appears on more bits of packaging than any other logo. And in leading with the brands then, it's very much about targeting a particular need or a particular state of mind, and finding the best way to engage people in that. And it's just good old segmentation. I mean, if you take the example, a very blunt example of Dove versus Axe, one's for women, one's for men, and that is a very basic segmentation. And of course, the segmentation gets more sophisticated than that. So if you took Axe and looked at the whole deodorant market, it's a very big body spray business around the world. We're the #1 deodorant company in the world, and we sell Shaw or Rexona. That's again one brand, but with different names in different countries. And that's the leader around the world. But we also have Dove antiperspirant. We also have Vaseline. We have Axe. We have Impulse. And so we play a whole portfolio of brands, really targeting different things for different people. And the idea is to get the biggest share you can of the market without sitting too much on top of each other. Now, there's some overlap, of course, but we try and separate our brands. And that's the importance of things like purpose and positioning, to really pull the brands apart to take the largest possible share of the market. Now, with Axe versus Dove, as you were saying, very different brands. But funny enough, you peel it down a couple of layers, they are both talking about confidence in a different way. And what Axe is trying to do for adolescent young guys is just give them that little bit of confidence in the most frightening thing that any young man has to get into, and that is the dating game. And I'm sure if you took yourself back a few years, it is really quite unnerving. And if you can give guys a little bit more confidence that actually, if they smell a little bit better, they might not scare off too many women. That sort of tries to help. And we do it, of course, in a tongue-in-cheek way. And the whole idea of Axe is to make people smile about it, rather than get too concerned about it. And that's the way to engaging young men. So the different brands are trying to engage their target audiences in the best way possible to really obviously build a business.
So you're targeting different segments with these different brands, but they're being managed internally by people. So you mentioned the 4 Ps. I say there's only 4, and they're people, 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 and people. And when you hire people, do you hire them into Unilever, maybe sometimes, or into the brand specifically? Do you rotate people through brands? How do you manage these brands from a people standpoint?
That's a very good question. I would say broadly we hire people into Unilever, and so we're focusing on people's skills. And whether that skill be marketing or sales or finance, or even more fine-tuned. Within marketing, maybe you're looking for someone who's got some digital skills or whatever. So it's very much skill-based. But then when you are in the company, which brands and categories you work on can vary quite considerably. And surprise, surprise, the people who really have empathy with the positioning do particularly well on that brand, and hence they stay there for longer. So the SVP of Dove, Steve Miles, who has two young girls and as daughters, but you wouldn't believe that something as sensitive as Dove is actually run by a guy. On the other side, by the way, the creative all through the 90s into the early 2000s for Axe was done by BBH, and it was a lady who was running that, Rosie Arnold. So it might not be what you might imagine. So it's more about people's skills and their empathy towards the brand and what the brand stands for. I think you need to have integrity. I think you can sort of tell whether the people behind a company or behind the brands really believe in what they're doing or not. And if they believe in what they're doing, I think it comes out in the brands.
If we can stick with those 2 examples of Dove and Axe maybe, if I think about confidence and being a man or a woman, an adolescent man, it's so different around the world, at least on the surface. How does one adapt the positioning? I guess the purpose stays the same, but the expression of that purpose might differ. How do you adapt it, and how do you manage that adaptation across the world?
Yes, I mean, this is obviously a big challenge. So, one of the benefits of being a global company is being able to leverage your expertise, your resources across many countries. We're the 2nd largest advertiser in the world. And in doing that, of course, then you would hope that we can buy advertising cheaper, and that we can build our brands more effectively, because we learn, we work with the best agencies, and we learn how to build brands accordingly. But against that, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are huge differences around the world. But also there are some fantastic similarities. And if I took a young guy, for example, there are more similarities between a young guy in Sao Paulo in Brazil, Mumbai in India, and Shanghai in China than him, his parents, and his grandparents in Mumbai, for example. So what we do is we look for the themes that run across and find ways of those human truths that really resonate across different markets. Now, of course, if you took the example of Axe, boys around the world are anxious about getting into dating girls, and similarly, girls around the world are concerned about beauty and their own body self-image, etc. But you have to find then executions which are appropriate for the different markets. And of course, in some markets, a good example, are some markets where you can't even show hair and we're selling shampoo. I mean, that might sound like a difficult challenge, but you have to respect the sensitivities of the individual markets. And so, yes, you're right. Beauty in India is different from beauty in the USA, and dating in China is different from dating in Brazil. But as long as you understand some of the codes, and then you take the core human truth, you can make that work.
And how does one gear up to manage that? How do you, if you think of terms of brand governance or even the structure, maybe it's a matrix structure, and what's your role as the global CMO versus the brand or the market leaders of the brand?
So yes, I think that's a good question because, again, different companies do it in different ways. But let me tell you how we do it as an example of how you could structure it. So we have a global marketing function, which I head. But then we also have categories which have what we call brand developers. I'll explain what they do. And then we have countries which have brand builders. So in reality, 3 different types of marketers, although I have the sort of the overview of how we do marketing in Unilever. Within the global marketing function, we have things where we believe are either specialists or we can leverage scale. So whether that be things like media buying, it'd be silly to buy media on a country-by-country basis. Google's a global company, Facebook's a global company. We should buy it globally and leverage our scale as the second largest advertiser. So I run that, and I run that around the world. So although I have media people who are in Shanghai or Sao Paulo, I also have some global media people who manage partnerships, etc. Another good example is the digital revolution that's going on right now. We want to have some experts around search or mobile, etc. We wouldn't want to put those in each and every market. So again, centrally in the media function, we have some specialist functions as well. Consumer market insight is run globally as well. So of course there will be market researchers doing consumer market insight who are in the categories and indeed in the countries, but they all report up through to me. And why? I think that's now an accepted approach. It's the real checks and balances. So many years ago when I was a marketing director, my market researcher reported to me, as indeed to my brand managers. And surprise, surprise, if I got particularly passionate about something, the market researcher felt slightly influenced to say, well, that is a good idea or not. And what we want to try and do is get independence in judging mixes and ads and products, etc. So we run our market research separate from our marketers so they can remain independent. Artwork management, a global artwork system, so that's run by me. Then we go across to category and brand development. And in category and brand development, they are running the positioning, the mixes, the advertising, the packaging, the innovation, the product. So really the things that really differentiate the brand across the world. And again, they will be sitting in one of our head offices in Singapore or in London or in Rotterdam, for example. But then their teams will be spread around the world. So this isn't an ivory tower of some global marketers sort of dreaming up what's right for Mumbai. The person who's working on Dove or indeed on Axe in Mumbai in brand development will be in India. And then we have the actual country marketers, what we call the brand builders. And they are really acting in real time, of the moment, developing the sort of ads I was saying about Shaw, for example, during a tube strike. The conversations, when you're having a conversation with a brand on Facebook, for instance, they will be replying and engaging with consumers. They will be doing sales promotions. They'll be engaging with our retail customers. They will be finding ways of really penetrating that local culture. And even sort of hyper-localization, the difference between northern India and southern India. You wouldn't get that feel if you were trying to do something for a brand across the world. And in that way, then, with those 3 different types of marketing, we then bring together a cohesive approach. And that's why it's important to have standard approaches for brand positioning, for how we do advertising, etc.
So maybe we'll end up with a question on Unilever. You said it's the most represented logo in the world on packaging. Some years ago, there was more. It gained more prominence, and I think also meaning when you redesign the logo to, and I believe it's vitality for life. To what degree is that expressed through the brands, and are there some examples you could share with us?
Yeah, so I mean, Unilever actually has been a company with quite a history of purpose. I mean, really going back to Lord Leverhulme in the late 1800s, and he talked about he wanted to make cleanliness commonplace. Cleanliness commonplace. And this was before McKinsey and people like yourselves were talking about mission statements and things like that. You know, he actually set out and he saw a very dirty England and Europe with you can imagine the slums of Victorian England, and he wanted to bring the humble bar of soap to the world. And to this day, we're still the largest soap company in the world. And he started off with actually one of the first brands. So up until that point, a lot of brands were named after the person who invented them. You know, Hoover, or indeed our Lipton tea was Sir Thomas Lipton. And Lord Leverhulme came up with Sunlight as the brand name for his bar of soap, because he wanted to bring sunlight to everyone, whether you are rich or poor as such, and the cleanliness. And that sort of purpose has stayed with Unilever in many ways over the years. But it has got more pronounced more recently. And the thought of what we've been doing really is trying to find a different way of doing business. We're genuinely trying to invent a different business model that has sustainability at its core, social and environmental sustainability. So quite a broad definition of what we mean by that. And in doing so, I mean, I took earlier saying I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Unilever, but I also run our sustainability as well. So our environmental and social sustainability, our Chief Sustainability Officer reports to me. And I also run communications, internal, external, corporate affairs, etc. And the thought really there is, and I'm seeing that a little bit more of the marketers all running communications, not so much sustainability, but the thought about running communications is in a joined up internet world, you can't really have a corporate communications department saying one thing and marketing department saying something else. I mean, there needs to be joined up, because what you say to the city or even what you say in internal emails can now end up anywhere.
So this really, I think, highlights very well. I have a very simple model that I talk about, business, brand, and behavior. And we saw on the business side, we've got the purpose that sits behind each brand, diversity of brands, portfolio of brands, and then these brands, of course, have certain behaviors across the world. It's a massive animal to juggle and to manage in a coherent way. Thank you for sharing your insights with us.